just in jobs. If you have a job, you can pay your mortgage, so the foreclosure go down, and so it goes on and on. I want to thank the President, the Vice President, the mayors, and all of the communities have worked together for this project. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I enjoy my colleagues coming to the floor and talking about us being without a vision and that the people will perish. Well, people are perishing all across our country because of the excessive spending that this administration, that the previous two Congresses have placed upon the people. Excessive debt. This year, the President is estimating we'll have $1,650,000 debt. And as best I can tell you, some sense of reality and dose of discipline must be invoked upon this Congress.
What my colleague
we're attempting to do, not only by this bill today, but by also following regular order, by allowing members of Congress to come and speak very clearly on the floor, by allowing an open process, things which were never allowed in the previous two Congresses. And so I appreciate members coming to the floor and talking about what's in the best interest of the country. Madam Speaker, the bottom line is that the Republican majority is going to do something about jobs. We're going to do something about spending. We will bring discipline, authority, responsibility, and actions directly to the floor of the House of Representatives as opposed to spending which was out of control, ideas which ran amok, and a lack of vision and clarity for our future. And so I'm very proud of what we're doing here today. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time.
Madam
Gentleman
Speaker,
from Florida.
My friend from Texas that I'm going to be the last speaker. Do you have additional speakers?
I appreciate the gentleman inquiring, and I have no further speakers.
All right, then
Thank
I'm
you.
prepared to close at this time. Madam Speaker, when Ms. Brown was speaking about the light rail program that may expire on Friday, and I'm hopeful that our governor will understand that, a retort came from my friend from Texas about her saying about a lack of vision is what causes these kinds of matters. Ms. Brown was talking about light rail. I don't recall my friend from Texas being upset when we did light rail in Houston, and I was for that. I might add, all of us know that we need to move people as best we can in other methodologies, as I've described earlier. Madam Speaker, Democrats and Republicans must work together to invest more in our nation's aging transportation infrastructure network, invest more, not less. We have a vision for America's future transportation infrastructure. Now we need the leadership to make it a reality. I shudder to think what would have happened to this nation's overall national security had Dwight Eisenhower not had the vision and those congresspersons who were here and the American people did not agree that we would have an interstate highway system. I understand that it takes money to do these things, but let's look at Minnesota as a for example. When the bridge collapsed in Minneapolis, tragically lives were lost, and a system that was a city's lifeblood had to be repaired. It has been repaired, but wouldn't it have been so much better not just to avoid the tragedy, that's obvious, but could we not have, as we do see in some of these situations, that these bridges need repair, these levees need repair. The congresspersons from Louisiana were talking about the levees that were blown away during Katrina 10 years before that happened. I stand here today and talk about a levee in the Everglades that unless it's repaired, it is going to cause a disaster. So you either pay me now on these things or you pay a whole lot later. So we're not talking about not spending, not investing. We're talking about doing it wisely and with accountability. I support the underlying bill, and I'd like to express my disappointment at the closed process. My colleague comes down here and talks about all the members are going to get a chance to come down here and they're going to get a chance to express their ideas. Well, there may be some members that may have had an amendment that might innovate something or might improve our transportation system. My friend, Mr. Sessions, will claim that this is technically not a closed rule. And it's true that the rule did allow one amendment by Chairman Micah, who wrote the underlying bill that I support. You heard that correctly. The only member who is allowed to offer an amendment is the same member who wrote the bill. On January 5th, the distinguished speaker, for whom I have great respect, and he is a friend of mine of this House, stated the following: above all else, we will welcome the battle of ideas, encourage it and engage in it, openly, honestly, and respectfully. As the chamber closest to the people, the House works best when it is allowed to work its will. My colleague, Mr. McGovern, offered a motion for an open rule so these important matters could be debated openly on the House floor, but this amendment was defeated last night or yesterday in a party line rule. In addition, I also made a motion to amend the rule and make in order an amendment by Delegate Holmes Norton of Washington, D.C., and co-sponsored by Mr. Moran of Virginia, which would simply have permitted the District of Columbia to spend its own money after March 4th, in other words, this coming Friday, in the event of a government shutdown. That was defeated on a party line. I ask you, Madam Speaker, does this sound like an open process to you? I urge my colleagues to vote no on this rule and instead pass this much-needed extension through a truly open process that allows all members to offer amendments. And I yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I will say that this process that we have had, as opposed to having it just mixed in a resolution, allows for a motion to recommit for the gentleman and his party. And it's my hope that they will take up that open process that we talked about, where we'll see what their ideas are. In a few minutes, we'll find out when they make that choice. But, Madam Speaker, we've heard a lot of things during this debate, up to and including about thoughts and ideas about shutting down the government, that looms ahead of us. Not one Republican is talking about shutting down the government. It is an issue that Republican leadership, including the gentleman, Mr. Boehner, the Speaker of this House, has openly talked about, that we will do every single thing that we can do to avoid a government shutdown. So it's my hope that this body would recognize we're not offering that as a threat to the American people. We're open for doing business. We're trying to make sure we not only address this issue weeks ahead of time, but that we're forthright about how we would go about giving options, opportunities, how we would work with the President and the Senate to make sure that we avoid this from happening. Secondly, we heard about a vision statement that evidently is lacking now from Republicans. Well, the facts of the case are very simple, and that is the vision that our country sees ahead right now is diminishment of jobs, a free enterprise system that is overburdened by rules and regulations, a policy that comes from this administration that is about destroying jobs, whether it be from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission, or government-wide, an assault on the free enterprise system and upon employers. And so what we're trying to do is to offer some reassurance today that we will go ahead and reauthorize not only the surface transportation bill, but with the understanding that the gentleman, the fabulous chairman of the committee, John Micah from Florida, will in fact lead on a bipartisan effort with Ranking Member Ray Hall, an opportunity to make sure that there is public involvement, that open hearings are held, that we in committee talk about this, and that every member be given a chance to participate. That is what Republicans are now willing to do. Regular order, open processes, and a chance to make sure that as it finds its way here to the floor, every single bill we want, where possible, to allow a Democrat motion to recommit. And so, Madam Speaker, you've heard me say earlier today that my Republican colleagues and I are committed to an open process and far, far more accountability, transparency, and an open process than what our friends have ever allowed us for the last 4 years. Today's legislation is a step in the right direction. The underlying bill has bipartisan support, even up at the Rules Committee, where Republicans and Democrats supported this underlying legislation. I went through regular order, a structure which worked, open debate on the floor. And this is just the first step in the necessary transportation funding and open dialogue with the American people, cities, states, counties. And it's essential that Transportation Infrastructure Committee take the time, review where they are, come up with the recommendations, and allowing that the future will be even brighter and better. Allowing this funding gives the states the tools that they need. We're working, as Chairman Micah is, with counties, cities, states, elected officials all across the country. The hard work that he is doing pays off again today. I will predict that we will pass this rule and this bill on a bipartisan basis because of the way not only our Speaker, John Boehner, and our Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, but also the great Chairman John Micah insist on making sure that the floor is run and that openness for the body. I look forward to working with Chairman Micah and the rest of the committee on that endeavor, and I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
All time has been yielded back without objection. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Madam Speaker?
Gentleman from Florida?
Yeah, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on adopting House Resolution 128 will be followed by 5-minute votes on ordering the previous question on House Resolution 129 and adopting House Resolution 129 if ordered.
The House holding their first series of roll call votes of the day, 3 votes, starting with the rule for the highway and mass transit bill they've been debating. That'll be followed by a procedural vote on the bill, and then debate on the rule for debating the bill mandating changes to paperwork requirements under the health care law. That was what they worked on earlier. After votes, we expect general debate on the highway and mass transit bill. Debate on the paperwork requirements for health care measure will take place tomorrow. While this vote's underway, we'll hear from a Capitol Hill reporter who's covering the federal highway and mass transit bill. Quarterly, why is the House considering another short-term extension of transportation programs?
Well, basically because they've been unable to enact a longer-term bill. This has been a problem since the last Congress, as a matter of fact.
What are some of the main points of contention preventing a full reauthorization from happening?
Well, right now there really is only one, which is that nobody has come up with any kind of viable way to pay for all the spending that people want. They've got proposals that spend lots of money, but no new revenue to back it up, which is exactly what made the bill die last year and caused all of these extensions.
So when did the last highway bill expire?
The last highway bill expired at the end of September in 2009, so it's been a while.
And what are the prospects for lawmakers coming to an agreement before the proposed extension expires at the end of September?
Well, actually, there was Secretary LaHood, Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, he gave a speech today to state DOT officials And, he said basically we need to get this done. Congress needs to get this done this year, or else it's going to become involved in a lot of election year politicking, and probably is not going to get done until after that. So there's a lot of pressure, but there's also a lot of work to do. And I think that, all eyes right now are on Congress in terms of how much they're able to get done. We'll have to see.
Can you give us an estimate of the cost of the short-term extension and the kinds of projects that are being authorized?
I have yet to see really a very good cost estimate. You have to realize that basically all they're doing is extending. They're extending for a few months in this year what's previously been enacted, the previously enacted spending levels. So there's some kind of pro rata calculus that I haven't seen. I'm not exactly sure.
And what are some of the projects that are being authorized in this?
Well, it continues all of the current spending. So basically what's been in place since 2009 is being continued. It's, our highway programs, it's our transit programs, it's our port money, waterways, everything that normally gets funded in a surface transportation bill is just sort of being extended for another few months.
Catherine Wolf is with Congressional Quarterly. We thank you for your time.
Thank you.
As voting continues, the Senate earlier today passed and sent on to President Obama a short-term funding bill that cuts $4 billion from the budget, preventing a possible government shutdown for another 2 weeks until March 18th. That vote in the Senate was 91-9. The House passed the measure earlier this week by a vote of 335-91. Well, after the vote in the Senate today, House Speaker John Boehner and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell held a briefing to discuss how they're waiting for Senate Democrats to lay out their plan for government funding for the rest of the year.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. The American people want us to focus on creating jobs and cutting spending, and passage of this short-term spending bill, I think, shows that we're listening to the American people. I think today's Senate vote is a positive step in the right direction. American families are doing more with less, and there's no reason why the federal government can't rein in out-of-control federal spending. Because reining in out-of-control federal spending will, in fact, help create a better environment for job creation in our country. The House has now passed 2 bills. H.R. 1 that was passed almost 2 weeks ago. Yesterday we passed the short-term bill. And these 2 measures were necessary because the Democrats failed to do a budget and failed to do any appropriation bills to fund the government through September 30th. So passing the short-term bill gives Senate Democrats 2 more weeks to either consider H.R. 1 or outline their own plan for how we move ahead. Americans have the right to know where Senate Democrats plan to cut spending and fund the government for the rest of the fiscal year is. And so we're waiting for them, and hopefully we'll see something from them soon. Senator McConnell.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I would only add that even though it was only a 2-week bill and a $4 billion reduction in spending, it is the first time I can recall in the time that I've been here our actually cutting spending on an appropriation bill. It's a small step, but a step in the right direction. And the question on your minds, obviously, is where do we go from here? Well, obviously, we need to know where Senate Democrats would take us from here. The House, as the Speaker's indicated, has passed 2 proposals, one to fund the government for the balance of the fiscal year, and then the 2-week CR. Now the question is, where are the Senate Democrats going to take us? What is their proposal? That would be the next step to try to resolve this for the balance of the year, and we look forward to hearing from the majority in the Senate.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Leader, the White House just announced that the Vice President will lead talks, inviting you to talks, that he would lead to deal with this. And Senate Democrats said that they actually are incorporating ideas of what they would be okay with in terms of cuts, and that the White House would present those cuts to you at this meeting. Is that sufficient? Would you come to the table with that in mind?
I think it's important to make clear that we've been in discussions with our Democrat colleagues for weeks. This isn't something new. And the House's position is we passed a bill. It's out there. I think it's time for them to outline for us what's their position to keep the government funded. We've done our work in the House.
Mr. Speaker,
adding to that, though, wasn't the, I mean, is there some suggestion here, though? You said you've been in discussions with your Democratic colleagues that if the White House has been asleep at the switch here, we've even heard from some Democrats that they wish that the White House would get more involved in dovetailing on Dan's question here, that, you know, with these talks, would that sort of get this down the road to where you guys can forge a bona fide agreement?
The House position is perfectly clear. We cut $100 billion off the President's request for this fiscal year. We have no clue where our colleagues on the Senate side are.
Could I just add? We just heard about this suggestion of the people who were supposed to be invited to a discussion on the way in here. So we'll take a look at what they have to say. But obviously, if I were you, I'd be asking Senate Democrats how they feel about commencing such a discussion. And number two, at the risk of being redundant, what the Speaker and I are saying makes perfectly good sense. Where is the Senate Democratic proposal? Where are they on the question of how do we fund the government for the balance of the year?
Can I just be clear on what you're saying? You are saying that House Republicans will not come to the negotiating table with Biden because you've already passed a bill and that's the line. That's
not what I said.
Are you going to participate in the talks?
Listen, this is me. I speak English. That's not what I said. I said the House has a position. Where's the Senate Democrat position? I have no idea where it is. How do you start a conversation where one House has spoken but the other House hasn't? And so where's the starting point? I mean, we want to start with H.R. 1? Be fine with me.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate has passed their CR. You've got 2 weeks. From this point on, there's apparently a lot of unsteadiness out there about the threat of government shutdown, the economy, and Senate Democrats...
There's no threat of a government shutdown. I've been reading this for weeks, and I chuckle. You've heard me say at this podium for months, going back to last fall, now that our goal was never to shut down the government. Our goal is to cut spending. We're listening to the American people. They don't want the government shut down. They want us to cut spending, and that's what we're going to do.
So in the next 2 weeks, you're going to sit down with Vice President Biden and the Senate and work this whole thing?
All of us want to fund the government through September 30th. Our team wants to cut spending in a real way, and it's time to get to work. You know, if you give Congress 4 weeks, guess what? They'll take 4 weeks. You give them 6 weeks, they'll take 6 weeks. We've got 2 weeks. Let's get the job done.
Mr. Speaker.
That earlier today. Again, the House right now is in the midst of a series of 3 roll call votes of the day. After this vote on the rule for the Highway and Mass Transit bill, we expect a procedural vote on the bill, and then a vote on the rule for debating the bill mandating changes to paperwork requirements under the health care law. The Supreme Court today handed down several decisions, including one regarding protests at military funerals. A short time ago, I spoke with a reporter who examined what the court decided. Mark Sherman is with the Associated Press. How did the Supreme Court rule in a case involving protests at military funerals?
Well, the court ruled by an 8-to-1 vote that the protests were protected by the First Amendment.
Who's the plaintiff in this case?
The plaintiff is a man named Albert Snyder, who sued a fundamentalist church in Topeka, Kansas, because the church members showed up outside his son's funeral. His son was a Marine who died in Iraq in 2006, and the church members, as they have at hundreds of other funerals, showed up outside his son's funeral with very provocative signs that said, thank God for dead soldiers and thank God for 9/11 and things like that.
Now, a number of media organizations, including the Associated Press, urged the court to reach an outcome in favor of the Westboro Baptist Church. Why is that?
Well, I think the media organizations, while they tried to distance themselves from the church's message, they were worried that if the court were to side with the Snyder family, that it could lead to an erosion of free speech rights.
So how did this case end up at the Supreme Court?
Mr. Snyder won a large judgment that was later reduced, but was still about $5 million after a jury trial, and the jury basically found that the picketing had caused an intentional infliction of emotional pain. That judgment was appealed, and the federal appeals court in Richmond, Virginia, threw it out, saying that the Constitution wouldn't permit it. And Mr. Snyder appealed that ruling to the Supreme Court, which today affirmed what the federal appeals court said.
Your story says that Chief Justice John Roberts described the court's holding as narrow. Does this decision open the door for others who might wish to take up this kind of protesting?
Well, I think he made clear that when the topic of the protest is a matter of public concern, in other words, not exclusively a personal attack on a private individual, but that when the protest itself is on a topic of a matter of public concern, it's pretty well protected by the First Amendment.
You said the ruling in the case was 8-1. Who gave the dissenting vote?
Justice Samuel Alito was the only dissenter, and he thought that the attacks on the Snyders were beyond the pale. Alito said that the country has a profound national commitment to free and open debate, but he said that's not a license for the vicious verbal assault that occurred in this case.
Has there been reaction from either party involved in the case to what the court decided?
Well, I have not yet heard from Mr. Snyder or his lawyers, but Margie Phelps, who is the daughter of the minister of the church and who also is a lawyer who argued the case at the court, she said that the outcome was expected. She said the only surprise was Alito's dissent, and she said that the only way for a different ruling would have been to have shredded the First Amendment.
Could people see this as the court sanctioning the message of the Westboro Baptist Church?
Well, that's certainly not what the court said it was doing. It said that what it was doing, the Chief Justice said that sometimes even hurtful speech it has to be protected because if not, it risks stifling public debate on public issues.
Mark Sherman is with the Associated Press. Thanks for joining us today.
You're quite welcome.
And if you go to the In the News section of our homepage at cspan.org, you'll find a link to listen to the October 2010 Supreme Court oral argument of Snyder v. Phelps. Again, that's at cspan.org. The House is in the midst of a series of 3 roll call votes, voting on the rule for highway and mass transit bill. This is a 15-minute vote. After this, we expect a procedural vote on the bill dealing with changes to paperwork requirements under the health care law, and then a vote on the rule for debating that same bill. You're watching C-SPAN.
On this vote, the yeas are 240, the nays are 152. The resolution is adopted.
Mr. Rooney. Mr. Rooney votes aye. Mr. Backus. Mr. Backus votes aye. Mr. Wiener. Mr. Wiener votes no. Mrs. Biggert. Mrs. Biggert votes aye. Mr. Royce. Mr. Royce votes aye. Mr. Reyes. Mr. Reyes votes no. Mr. Thompson of Mississippi. Mr. Thompson of Mississippi votes no. Mr. Davis of Illinois. Mr. Davis of Illinois votes no. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey votes no. Mr. Conyers. Mr. Conyers votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 256, the nays are 169. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on ordering the previous question on House Resolution 129, which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 13, House Resolution 129, Resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 4, to repeal the expansion of information reporting requirements for payments of $600 or more to corporations and for other purposes.
Question is on ordering the previous question. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The House now on the second of 3 votes. Right now a procedural vote on the bill dealing with changes to paperwork requirements under the health care law, and then a vote on the rule for debating the paperwork bill. Debate on the paperwork bill is expected tomorrow. Coming up after votes today, we expect general debate on the highway and mass transit bill, with a vote on final passage expected at about 4 p.m. Eastern. Of course, you'll be able to see that here on C-SPAN. Another fiscal item that's looming on the congressional agenda is whether or not to raise the debt ceiling. From the Hill this afternoon by Peter Schroeder, House Republicans may be aiming for a very tight window on the debt limit debate after House Majority Leader Eric Cantor said today that Republicans will wait for tax revenues to come in mid-April before weighing a vote on raising that ceiling. The Majority Leader's comments indicate lawmakers could have a matter of days to raise the $14.3 trillion limit, as his time frame closely meshes with when the Treasury Department estimates that it would hit that limit. Tuesday, the Treasury updated its estimate, saying it now expects to hit the limit sometime between April 15th and May 31st.
The yeas are 243, the nays are 185. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
So the House is now voting on the third of 3 bills that they debated earlier today. Actually, there's a third of 3 votes they're taking. Then we expect a general debate on the highway and mass transit bill. Final passage expected at about 4 p.m. Eastern. This story from The Hill today. The price of oil increasing recently because of the rising tensions in the Middle East and Africa. Well, questions have been raised about using the oil reserves to stabilize the price. Energy Secretary Stephen Chu said today that volatile oil prices will be reined in by spare world oil capacity without the United States having to tap into its own strategic oil reserves. He said the administration is watching the situation very closely, and he acknowledged that the oil price spikes could have a bad effect on consumers and industry and the economy, but he stressed that there is no indication that the United States will have to tap into its strategic petroleum reserve. His comments come as unrest in Libya, North Africa, and the Middle East have pushed oil prices above $100 a barrel.
On this vote, the yeas are 252, the nays are 175. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Without objection. For what purpose does the House will be in order. House will be in order. The chair lays on the House the following communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, on February 16, 2011, pursuant to the provisions of 40 United States Code 3307, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure met in open session to consider a resolution related to the General Services Administration's FY 2011 Capital Investment and Leasing Program. The resolution authorizes the consolidation of the operations of the National Gallery of Art and the Federal Trade Commission that will result in savings to the federal government. The committee adopted the resolution by voice vote with a quorum present. Enclosed is a copy of the resolution adopted by the committee on February 16, 2011. Signed, John L. Mica, Chairman.
Referred to the Committee on Appropriations. House will be in order. Will members and/or staff take your conversations to the back of the chamber or off the House floor, please? What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I'd like to call up House Resolution 662 for its consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 9, H.R. 662, a bill to provide an extension of federal aid highway safety, motor carrier safety, transit, and other programs funded out of the Highway Trust Fund pending enactment of a multi-year law reauthorizing such programs.
After 1 hour debate on the bill, it shall, pursuant to House Resolution 128, the bill is considered read. After 1 hour debate on the bill, it shall be in order to consider the amendment printed in House Report 112-20, if offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica, or his designee, which shall be considered read and shall be separately debatable for 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica, and the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Rahal, each will control 30 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 662.
Without objection, so ordered. Will the gentleman suspend for a moment? The House will be in order. Gentleman may proceed.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you again, and I come to the floor today to pass extension of our major surface transportation legislation. That's H.R. 662. First of all, I ask unanimous consent that an exchange of letters with the Committee on Ways and Means be submitted to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I might first lead off by informing members and the Speaker that this extension is a spending freeze at 2010 levels through September 30th.
we find ourselves in a situation where the major transportation legislation that authorizes all of the policy, the various projects, all the funding levels, and all of the activities that are so important to job creation, to building the nation's infrastructure. That legislation expired September 30th, 2009. In the past Congress, and since that time, we have passed a number of short-term extensions. We're now on the 6th extension of that legislation. What happens when the Congress does this is we end up sending the worst message and the worst policy possible across the nation, across the land, to our states and our localities that are trying to build the nation's infrastructure, and trying to determine what federal policy, what their partnership and funding relationship will be with the federal government. And right now, in a time in which across this nation we're experiencing some of the worst unemployment. In my district, I have some areas with 17% unemployment. And where is that unemployment? That's in the construction industry. So it's critical that we pass an extension of the current legislation and extension that we're on, the 6th extension that we're on, and we do that before Friday. Friday is when the current extension expires. Again, this is important for jobs. Why? Our state transportation departments have only been able to do small projects. Now, they've done some sidewalks and they've done some repaving and they've done minor construction projects. But because they don't have a dependable federal partner in the hiccup manner in which we have provided policy and funding direction as far as our federal law for major transportation projects, because it's been done in such a helter-skelter fashion, people are not employed. Projects do not move forward. And this is the worst time that this could happen. I'm determined that that won't happen again. Now, I might like to do a short-term extension, and some people have said we should do that. But the responsible thing for us to do now is to pass through the fiscal year, and this extension takes us to September 30th, so states can plan, so people can get back to work, so we have some semblance of policy regarding building the nation's infrastructure in place now. People are crying out for jobs across this country. And we may not pass any other piece of legislation this year, but our transportation and infrastructure legislation, this and the highway reauthorization. I said highway, I meant the FAA reauthorization. In addition to highway and surface and all the other modes, our FAA extensions have become almost the saddest commentary you could have on building, again, the nation's important infrastructure. We've done 17 extensions of the FAA legislation. So our airports and others can't plan. Now, we're not going to let that happen under our watch. We are going to set policy today and extend until the end of this fiscal year in a responsible manner. Now, some people on the conservative side of the aisle, and I'll match my credentials with any of them, want to know about the money that's being spent. This is not money that is general revenue. This is entirely the Federal Highway and Transit Trust Fund. When we came here, we also said we weren't going to force the Congress to spend more money in general revenue than we had in that fund. And this extension adheres to that policy, that we won't be reckless in spending, we won't spend beyond what we have in the fund, and this extension only expends funds from within that trust fund. So I want my conservative friends, and I consider myself in the conservative fiscal corner, responsible corner in spending, to know that that is the way this is crafted. So, again, I think we have an obligation to move forward. We're doing it on a sound basis. We're freezing at the 2010 levels, and we will be able, at least until September, to get people to work. Now, I know sometimes I can move legislation along in this body, and I work hard sometimes to do that. But I can tell you I cannot pass a full authorization bill by this Friday. We just took over again, some of these responsibilities a few weeks ago. We've had 6 extensions. I don't want to get again into a situation where we're doing these short-term job-killing extensions. So that's the reason that we're here. That's the responsibility that we have as a Congress in moving forward and again setting that policy and setting a time frame in which our states and others who actually do these projects can operate. And again, it's being done within the responsible parameters that this new Congress and the House of Representatives has set forward. I do want to say finally that I thank my colleague, Mr. Ray Hall, who is the ranking member, for his interest in moving forward with a long-term bill. In reaching out, we held the first of our hearings, and we're doing these around the country. We've done more than a dozen from the Atlantic to the Pacific, but we started in Beckley, West Virginia, a little over a week ago, in the hometown of the ranking member, because we want our permanent legislation to be long-term, a 6-year bill, to have in place sound policy. We want it done on a bipartisan basis, and to ensure also that it was done on a bicameral basis. We did almost an unprecedented hearing with Senator Boxer, the gentlelady from California, who chairs the Environment and Public Works Committee of the United States Senate. We did a joint bicameral bipartisan hearing in Los Angeles last week to kick off our larger effort to again have in place the very best policy regarding our infrastructure for the nation. So with that, with those comments, again, I want to thank folks that we have an agreement here to move forward. We need to do that. We need to get people working in this country and do it in a responsible fashion. And I believe that H.R. 662 will do that, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from West Virginia.